All right, so now we're going to turn our attention to what we mean by an argument and how should we understand what an argument actually is. I've got some other videos that I'm going to include that I made a long time ago that'll help you kind of dig into this in a little more detail. But for this video, I just want to spell out some of these key terms, right? So what exactly it is that we're talking about when we use the word argument. What is an argument? All right, so for our purposes, an argument is not going to be the sort of thing, the contentious sort of thing that you might get yourself into at the bar or, with your drunk uncle or something like that, right? We mean something very specific here by an argument. All arguments have to include two things, at least one premise and at least one conclusion, right? And both the premise and the conclusion of an argument must be truth-apt statements, the sort of thing that can be either true or false, right? So it has to have one of each of these. Those are the two key ingredients in any argument. And notice that the premises, right? The premises of an argument are supposed to provide support for the truth of the conclusion, right? So if the premises are true, then that should give us reason to accept the truth of the conclusion. Of course, there's different kinds of arguments. There's deductive arguments, there's inductive arguments, there's appealing to the best explanation. These are abductive arguments. And that's why I'm going to include some other videos that will go into more detail with regard to that. Those different kinds of arguments, right? But generally speaking, when we use this word argument, right, what we mean by an argument is it has to have at least one premise, and that premise is being presented in a way that it's supposed to provide support for the truth of the conclusion, right? The conclusion is the main contention. The conclusion is what the premises are trying to justify or to show that it's true. It's the thing that's being argued for, the main sort of, the goal of the argument, right? The main contention there. Now, when you're doing a reading, when you're looking through a magazine, or if you're looking at through a blog post, or you're reading an article, or the newspaper, if anybody still reads the newspaper, what you'll notice is that arguments typically do not show up in premise conclusion form, right? They don't really look like premise one, premise 2, premise 3, and then we get like some conclusion, right? That's not the way it's typically presented, unless if you're reading maybe a philosophy paper, some article, an actual philosophy journal, right? It's helpful to put it in this form, but that's typically not the way it's presented to us. Rather, we have to sort of sift through what is being presented in the paragraph or the section or in the entire article perhaps. We've got to look through that to try to figure out what is being used as a premise and what is being used as a conclusion. Not everything that's in the particular passage that we're concerned with is going to count as being a part of the argument, right? So that's why we have to pay attention to the specific claims that are being made. And to do this, we can use what are sometimes referred to as conclusion indicator words or premise indicator words. And I think it's helpful to start with looking for the conclusion, the main contention that's being argued for. And we've got various terms that help us do this, right? These are the conclusion indicator terms, right? And you might guess that some of these terms seem sort of obvious, right? Words like therefore, or hence, or so, or thus, or it follows, or maybe just to say in conclusion, right? So we've got these sort of indicator words. These words indicate that what's about to follow is the conclusion, right? Or the main contention of what's being argued for, essentially. So if we start off by trying to identify the conclusion by looking for these sort of terms, then we can go through a kind of process of elimination to try to figure out what the premises are. Because those premises are going to be the factual statements that's being used as evidence in support of the conclusion. Right? So these are not as easy to determine, but we might have something like if, then, we might have an and, we might have an or. These are logical connectives. We'll spend more time later on in the semester kind of looking at these in more detail. But we've got these sort of words that kind of indicate to us that we're working with a premise. But we also have words that would suggest this is being used as evidence. So we might say some finding, or according to some expert, or it was determined that, right? So it's not as clear as the conclusion indicator words, but these premise indicating words, we can kind of arrive at them through this process of elimination. So that's one of the things I want you to practice doing, especially in the homework, is trying to make the distinction between what's being used as the conclusion and what's being used as a premise that's supposed to provide support for the conclusion. And remember, arguments have to have both. They have to have at least one premise and one conclusion, right? One of each. If it doesn't, then it's not an argument.